course. Just to remind everybody, this is an informational session. It's being held virtually to accommodate as many people as possible. I think we have almost 300 people on the call right now, and it's still climbing. This is not a board meeting. There's no formal action that will occur here. I'm the only board member actually on the meeting. Dave Rothman's on the panel as well here, and then Ron Hansen from Spicer, who's our owner's engineer, and Kayla Stryker, our treasurer and secretary, will be presenting with me as well today. There is a board meeting on April 11th to discuss, among other things, the plans and project status, as well as the financing plan and project status. This will be an open meeting, and there will be public time for comments. Essentially, what we're trying to do here, with the implementation of the project and where it's at, and then with the significant funding coming in from the state, we're trying to have a communications session to bring all this together and kind of reset where we are in terms of the financial plans, the special assessment district, and working through that. So we felt this format was the best to get as much information to as many people as possible. And if you have questions, please send them in. We will try to answer them during if it's related to subject matter we're covering, we'll try to cover it during that time. But at the end of the meeting, we will have a time to respond to questions that we haven't tied in. I'm going to put a lot of bias on what we can answer today on questions related to the subject matter in this meeting, which is based on an informational meeting. So with that, we'll go to the agenda. We'll do a quick review of the recovery and restoration timeline and status, update on the state and federal funding we've gotten to date so people can put that in perspective. And then we'll do kind of a view of operational assessment. We've covered that in terms of the model, but we'll redo it again, and future capital assessments. And we'll cover the project costs and an update of that, the appropriation methodology for the assessment, and then just kind of the timelines and structure we're going through. And then, as we said, we'll have a question. We'll answer the questions that are coming in during and at the time of the meeting as we go forward. Okay, with that, maybe a review of the timeline. There's a few questions actually related to this about being on target. So let me go through those. So we are on, with recovery, Secord and Smallwood are stabilized. The booms remain to be put in. We've got the federal funding from last time, so you'll see that happening in the as spring construction kind of gets going here. Edenville has primarily finished most of our heavy work. We're on track to finish up some of the final activity, like finishing up some of the grass seeding and other things around the dams, and finalizing with some of the channels and stuff that need to be cleaned up, but pretty much done other than some final work. Sanford permitting was delayed for a few months, but we are kind of on a good track now to finish that in the summer here. It's underway right now. And we did slow up on erosion projects in terms of starting new ones because we were running out of state funding. But now that we have more financing from the state, and specifically related to erosion separately, that we'll be able to start working on those again. And I think we're already
Please elaborate on that, please, Dave.
Financing, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. Obviously, the state funds have significantly changed our approach to financing. It's going to be as one project, and we'll use either a USDA note or loan at the end. So where we were basically using USDA loans as a primary funding source, we had to kind of go by the USDA rules, if you will, and we were kind of financing this dam by dam, and that was a pretty complex activity to do. But with this kind of money, the the funding has got to the point where the state funding is making it more economically feasible over all the other dams. So if any dam tried to do this on their own, it would be a lot more funds relative to what it's going to be if we share it all together. And so it's a one project model we're building here, and one assessment structure. On engineering, Secord and Smallwood are frankly a couple months behind. We were looking at for some alternative methods that as we came into the cost structure. Primarily the challenge was as we looked at these capacity numbers we've been sharing, the footprint, especially on Secord, is pretty thin to get the kind of numbers in. So we're looking at basically catching up on that and some intervention. I think the USDA is funding up front allows us to de-risk some of that. But Ron, maybe just a couple minutes of the alternatives we're looking at on Secord that are a little different than what we've looked at in the past on how we might, some of the alternatives we're looking at there to work on.
Yeah, the primary points of the value engineering and alternatives on the Secord was to look at the seepage cutoff wall and compare the use of sheet piling versus a soil concrete bentonite slurry wall. And then the second point of the value engineering was to review the auxiliary spillway and compare a roller compacted concrete spillway alternative versus the poured in place or normal concrete alternative that had the flashboards on it. And where the engineering team landed is to find that it's going to be more efficient and economical to use the soil concrete bentonite seepage wall and to use the roller compacted concrete. These alternatives are as safe and operate as well as the initial alternatives, and so this is a better value for the customers in the special assessment district.
Yeah, I think we get a better footprint lineup of it and stuff to work in terms of not being as close to the Secord Road as an example to work. So that it's been a more complex than we anticipated, but we feel like we're on a model that we can catch up to where we are. And so this might be a little yellow if you're using the stoplight chart, but we feel like we could make that up. We're in the process right now of kind of looking at the alternative analysis, and I'll bring this up later. We're going to have, while we are showing some cost numbers on the dam, it's very high level today because we wanted to get more of the financing, but we will have either a video out or a webinar out in either May or June to kind of go through what's really happening, where we are with the dams in terms of the actual layout and stuff to go. And then we are still on path on the construction side. What we're looking in this model now is we're starting to go to pre-qualification, so we get the contractors lined up for the bidding process. Again, we're going to be looking at managing this across, running 3 or 4 projects at the same time, and how we can kind of make that work. And we'll, as we get closer to the end of the year, we'll kind of map that out. So we feel pretty good at where we are on the engineering and construction. Environmental restoration are really related to more the Wixom and Sanford Lake. We do have a program we have to get done this year, get agreement with Eagle and the other agencies of how we'll work through that to drive through that on Edenville and Sanford. So there are some headwinds and tailwinds in this. One of the big issues we have is we do have an endangered species concern on Edenville related to the snuffbox mussel. Obviously, we have a lot of studies going on in that. If we would find that species, we would have to address how we would manage around it. So we have studies underway for that. So there are some risks in this plan, but we're currently, bottom line is we're not changing the deadlines and stuff. We feel like we can Again, it's still an aggressive schedule, but we can get construction done for the Secord of Smallwood in 2024, Sanford in 25, and Eatonville in 26. Next slide, Kayla. So a little funding update. It's a little complicated, but wanted to cover it. $200 million of state funding was formally approved for the Four Lakes Task Force Dam. It went through the legislation and approved by the Senate, and then Senate and House, and then the governor signed on March 30th, I think was the date. So all good news. Huge. That's, I think, if not the largest, one of the largest single project kind of grants that were given, especially for a community our side. People can't recall it. Give an example of it. So a huge effort, and appreciate all our legislative support in getting that through. Appreciate the governor, especially Jim Stamus at the end, and Jason Wentworth were really key in this, along with Annette Glenn and Roger Hawk. So really good push on that side, but also I think the community and their support and visible support for this structure really helped us with that. You'll see there's another grant that was given during that time too, which was the $15 million grant to Eagle related to issues around the May 2020 time period. $3 million was given to Midland County to look at downstream some of the issues. Obviously they were impacted significantly downstream of the Sanford Dam. So to look at flooding and mitigation plans for that. And $3 million were given to Four Lakes Task Force. The first 200 were given to us as the delegated authority for the county of Midland and Gladwin. The other $3 million is granted to us as the sponsorship, also supported by Midland and Gladwin County, for the recovery effort, and as part of the NRCS grant, we're the assigned federal sponsor for that. And so there's $3 million that are dealing with shoreline erosion and debris control. And so none of that's been a part of the special assessment district. It's a program we've been running to recover the shorelines and structures as we go forward. Some people may have read that there's a 20% match. What's unusual about the match, is it includes federal funding. So the funding that the state matched for the federal funds, that counts as well. So we don't see this as we probably, I think, Kayla, today have 15,000 we've already spent with
15 million, yeah.
15 million, not thousand. 15 million, and we probably have another 15 million to spend. And then with the $5 million per private funding, it's not going to be hard to get to the match and work through that. And the way this is written, because we have the special assessment as kind of the funder last resort, the money's not being held up by the state to work through that. So we were talking about a $10 million anticipation note. Unlikely that we're going to go after that. We're working with Treasury now over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We feel like they're going to be able to in a position to start moving the funds over, so that'll make sure that we don't have to go after that note as that interim structure. We were worried about the timing of this. It could have been, we're not going to complain about the timing, but so the March timing is tight for us, but we feel we can get through that working with Treasury. And Kayla and I had discussions this week with them. The operational assessments, we're going to cover those again with adjustments around the methodology, the continuous plan. The state grant doesn't impact operational assessments. It's all about the recovery and restoration. We still have to have a platform in place to run the programs and structure of the operation of the system, the dams, and the maintenance of what's going on here. The time frame of the dams to restore is not impacted, so the numbers we showed, but it does improve the probability of us staying on track. But these plans that we're going to show you, we have not put any future grants in. We're going to show you the grants we've done, but in all likelihood, there will be a capital assessment on property owners that process will take place probably to establish assessment likely in 2024, with assessment being addressed in 2025. And that's the major discussion, one of the major discussion points of the presentation today. So just a kind of a summary. Were you covering this or what? Oh, I was covering key points. I'm trying to get you. Okay, so the kind of the major, what I wanted to do is just kind of give a feel for where the funding has come from today. We've got really over $250 million of funds either received or anticipated. And so, if you go back and think about where we were in May of 2020, with, kind of just about to issue a $8 million note to start the new project. And then this thing just fundamentally changed in order of magnitude. It's been actually pretty impressive for the whole team, the way we've worked together to bring this kind of funding together. So in that, we had the original $5 million grant. There were still a few $1 million left of that, I think 2 or so. But $22.5 million from the state. As we went through recovery, we were raised through the foundations and companies and a lot of the individuals on this phone, $5 million for kind of a private funding. We're able, with the support of kind of linking in the USDA and Senator Stabenow, Congressman Molinar really helped in kind of helping us link up with them. $20 to $40 million. Like we just said, we've spent about $15 million already on the NRCS grants. We've got $750,000 in appropriation with Congressman Molinar's support. Eagles helped us with FEMA on a $400,000 grant for just engineering in general. Dave Rothman was kind of coordinating all that. And then obviously the big number of the $200 million for restoration of the 4 lakes and dams. And then this number I mentioned before, there's $15 million that Eagle got. Only $3 million come to us, but that helps us match about $9 million of the erosion and debris removal. So we still have we probably today don't, but we had at the time about $5 million left of state funds that were allocated to the work already committed here. And so we're using that to pay down, but then these other funds are going to come in over the next several weeks here to kind of keep us moving. But I wanted to just give people a perspective of that to work on that. So I think what we're looking at is kind of getting into the discussion of the fact that, the anticipated costs for restoration of the dams exceed that amount of the state. That was kind of outlined in our May 20th restoration plan, but it's actually greater than the number that we were looking at in that plan at the time, or hoping for, I'd say. So what we've done here is we've tried to put a program together to cover the assessment costs that would come to the program around 2024, 2025 as it relates to the capital assessment. What I would start this with is we're kind of communicate a conservative estimate because I want to make sure we have a number out there that people can look at and be informed at, but we're not. This is a realistic estimate. It has some conservative assumptions in it. Going to get better, yes, but we'll show you the sensitivities of where it's going to change. The slides we want to review is a project cost to give you a feel where we are, the estimated future capital assessment, and then how we're going to computate the computational cost of the operational assessment. We actually reviewed that the last board meeting, but it's a slide. And then the methodology, and then finally just the process we're kind of working through. What we feel is with the capital assessment, this is one of the kind of timing things, is we didn't want to go through an operational assessment process not knowing where the state money was going to be. But once we got the state money, we felt like, okay, we're going through this operational assessment. We need to be clear to the community what the long-term number is going to be. So they look at the operations assessment, but also look at the kind of range that we would look at for a capital assessment in the 2024-2025 process. Now, that being said, there's still range in that, and we're explaining it, but we feel it's important to share both these numbers now, even though one of them's still kind of in an estimate mode and still a few years out to work with. So with that, we'll kind of walk through this process. We'll have a paper that comes out of the program here, I'm hoping tomorrow. So we're going to put it, after we do this, we'll put a news flash out. It'll have the website information in it, to the SAT, the pointing to the special assessment process. We'll put the webinar information out there. We'll also, I think, if not tomorrow, the next day, put a detailed review of the methodology out there, and as well as kind of building the maps and stuff. Will probably take another week, but we will have also a report on the cost of the dams and where we're looking at them in terms of where they are currently now, because we're obviously farther along on the engineering. And then like I said, we'll have a video session or webinar session like this, or a video structure where we communicate kind of a little bit more detail of the dam. So right now, what we're doing with the dams on this presentation is kind of giving you the cost. And then we have a little report that will give you a little bit more. And then as we get to more detail in the next month or two, we'll kind of roll specifically why the alternatives are being picked and where we're thinking through that to work through. Bottom line, when we roll all these numbers up, we're still kind of in a planning estimate at $250 million. The range kind of is at the low end 230, at the high end 270. Those that are remembering what we had before, we had $215 million for the construction period. We needed this other $10 million to get through, and then we had this dam number was plus or minus 25% at the time, and we picked a kind of a planning number of 250. And that 250, we didn't have all the items embedded in. So when you look at these numbers, are bigger than the numbers because that extra $25-30 million are now kind of embedded in the dam numbers as we've gotten a little more defined. Ron went through a little bit of the alternatives and stuff. Reality is that the numbers are in the same range. We have actually probably more confidence we can kind of stay in this range. The Secord Smallwood dams are coming in higher, primarily this issue of the amount of capacity versus the spillway alternatives. Sanford is coming in a little higher, but within the estimate, and Edenville is coming lower, but within the estimate. So they all kind of total out together. The point, I think, that some of the questions is, so we're looking at this as managing this as a total project, because, for example, as we go out and there's 5 different spillway structures with, at least 20 some gates that we're putting on, as an example. We don't want to have 20 different vendors out there. We want to have the same kind of systems put in place, yet we want to get the right kind of competitive structure here. So running it as one project is important. I also would say that when we looked at this with this $200 million, that if any project would finance this on their own, the assessments we're going to show you would be significantly less. So we're not allocating these dollars from the state by dam. We're trying to be as optimal as we can to get all these dams under the lowest cost they can. The assessment for all the district will be at the lowest level that we can get it. And then what we'll be doing is at the very end of the project, we'll be looking at how much delta we have left in terms of the grants and the funds. And that will be the part that gets assessed across all the districts and stuff to work through. So the number is still in the same planning level range. The difference is we've got a $200 million front end loaded funding that changes significantly the assessment numbers that we were talking about before. So just at a high level, we showed this before, and so I'm just, Kato's going to give a little bit of detail. In the old model, we could go in and say, that, hey, 90% of the people were lakefront. The methodology was simple. As we went through it and people looked at it, we got the feedback, and we spent the last year and a half doing it, and we we knew we were going to have a pretty significant structure related to capital stuff. We did a lot more work and more granularity on the methodology here for apportioning the numbers. And so when we give you, it's harder to give you the average, and the average isn't for everybody. It's actually, there's very few people have exact average, but it gives you a flavor. So we gave a couple examples here. Kato's going to go into some more detail, but at the currently, and these assessments would be just for the capital assessment. But if you're looking at the numbers would be for 2024-5, a lakefront property, let's say typical 100-foot frontage, reasonable water view, 4 foot in depth would be about $345 a year. A back lot, a residential lot with reasonable access would be about $180. But those numbers go from $250 to $460 on the bottom, and they go on the front lots, and they go from about $115 to $230 on the back. So I'm going to have Kayla take the next step and kind of just go through the stats a little bit, Kayla.
Yeah. So as Dave talked about, the estimates we're showing are based on a $250 million planning estimate. Four Lakes Task Force believes that we will require $10 million of that $200 million from the state of Michigan to get to the construction phase, leaving $190 million that we can apply against construction costs, thus the $60 million capital assessment estimate. So the numbers on this slide are based on a $60 million capital assessment financed for 30 years at 3% interest. Given the methodology updates, 91% of residential parcels fall between an assessment with a factor of 0.25 and 1, with the average assessment being a factor of 0.75. So what we've done in the table to the left is illustrated the principal payment for this range and then the average annual assessment. On the lowest end of the range, a factor of 0.25 would have $2,360 of principal in an assessment and an annual payment of $115. And at the high end of the range, a parcel with a factor of 1 would have $9,430 of principal and an average annual assessment of $460. We also indicated the average on here. But as Dave said, very few people are actually at the average, and we would encourage you to look at the map on our website for your specific apportionment percentage. But 91% of the parcels will fall within this range between $115 and $460 annually. And the table to the right here is intended to give you all a better idea of where the majority of homeowners are falling. So you'll see that 39% are estimated to pay between $115 and $345. 52% are estimated between $345 and $460, and 9% of property owners are greater than $460. So with a apportionment of factor greater than 1.
And then Kayla, I think one point is there are other higher assessments, but they're for other types of entities other than commercial entities and stuff like that.
Yes, that is an important. This is all residential. So we're talking when we say 91% of parcels are in this range, that's for residential parcels.
Right. And I think the point on the principal side is, there's two kind of ways that people look at this, what the yearly assessment was. And some of these, if people recall, were in the $2,000 range and up. And then on the principal payment, this is the piece that other people look at this in terms of, hey, that's a lien on my property, and how am I going to handle that? These numbers are, again, probably 4 times smaller than they were before. So not that they're not numbers that people have to work through, but it is something that kind of from a community point of view, when you look at it and people look at assessment districts, these are reasonable numbers in general that can kind of manage through a little bit to do.
So on this next slide, we wanted to walk through some sensitivities. So current planning estimates indicate that $60 million is the best assessment estimate given the current construction estimates and the funds that have been allocated to the project to date. But it's important to understand that there are sensitivities to consider surrounding these estimates. These sensitivities could contribute to increasing or lowering assessment estimates that we provided on the last slide. The largest item that could impact the cost estimate is a change in construction costs. The current $60 million capital assessment is based on a preliminary construction planning estimate and current levels of state of Michigan funding. As design engineering efforts continue in the coming years, these construction planning estimates will be revised with greater certainty and could increase or decrease. The current construction planning estimates of $250 million include a confidence interval of plus or minus 25%. If construction costs were to increase or decrease, it would impact the amount that is needed in a capital assessment. So to provide you with an idea of what that would mean on a per parcel basis, for a parcel with a factor of 1, which was on the high end of that range we just showed, a cost increase of $20 million for the capital assessment would mean an increase in $60 per parcel on an annual basis. Another thing that has the potential to impact the cost here is the financing term. The current capital assessment estimate assumes 30-year financing. Should FLTF ultimately have the ability to seek other financing and a 40-year financing term is realized, annual assessment costs could decrease by approximately $60 for a parcel with a factor of 1. And then last, changing interest rates could ultimately impact the annual cost to homeowners. FLTF is assuming a 3% interest rate for a capital assessment in 2024. Current interest rates for USDA financing are around 2.5%. Therefore, 3% is only an estimate for 2024 based on current trends in the market. Ultimately, the interest rate could be higher or lower than 3%, and that would impact annual assessment costs. So an example of what that could mean on a per parcel basis is that an increase in interest rates of 1.5% would cause a cost increase of approximately $50 per parcel, again, for a parcel with a factor of 1. So it's important to note at the bottom of the slide here, it would take all 3 of these events to happen to get the average annual capital assessment for a parcel with a factor of 0.75 to over $500 a year. Likewise, lower interest rates and lower project costs could bring the number to less than $250 a year, but the key takeaway here is that these are high-level estimates over 2 years out, and there are a lot of factors that could impact the assessment estimates we've presented. These were only presented with the intention to give homeowners an idea of a potential assessment given the news on state funding.
Yeah, I would just say if for those in the room, I mean, everybody knows that it's an volatile world today in the structure. You'd have to imagine it's hard there's no number that would give us certainty that this project would be, $380 million. So the swing of this isn't going to bring it back to where we were. We're pretty constrained. The 40 to 40-year financing is we're capable of. We went back to 30 only because we may not use a USDA loan structure with 40 years. Makes a lot of sense. Bond structure, you can get 40-year bonds and schools get 100-year bonds, but in general, 30 years more favorable. So we're not sure exactly. We're 3 years away from financing. Interest rate,